The Last Gift of the Fairy, a myth of mercy and moonlight. Prologue, the whisper beneath the pillow. The child's tooth lay in a small pouch beside her bed, neat as a pearl. Her father, not wanting to break the magic, told her a story. She nestled under the duvet, eyes bright with the delicious weight of expectation, of magic, and, of course, morning gifts. When he looked at her in the soft lamplight, he saw his own reflection caught in her twinkling eyes. He sighed, for it had been many years since he had felt the presence of the other, that thin, shimmering veil of childhood wonder. He settled into the old chair beside her bed, its frame groaning like an aging friend, and laid a gentle hand upon her brow. "The tooth fairy comes at night," he said in a gravelly voice, "and she uses teeth to build her shining palace." He lifted his fingers into the light and cast a jumble of shapes upon the wall, a crooked shadow of towers and turrets, more suggestion than skill. "A palace made from teeth?" she asked, nose wrinkling, half laughing in disbelief. "Well, yes," he admitted softly. "They have to go somewhere." He shrugged, content with the logic, and she lay back, thinking it over, her face softened by the first drift of sleep. He watched her for a while, the pouch resting beside her pillow, that tiny token of a day gone by, now bound for myth. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, a sound like someone sighing. He almost spoke to it, the way his ancestors might have once whispered a prayer. He felt a tingling in his veins, a small, forgotten stirring of belief. And as the house fell quiet, he found himself wondering, who was the fairy, really, and how long had she been waiting at her windows? Part 1. The Tooth Fairy and the Reaper. Before time dared fracture its first second, before silence surrendered to sound, there was only stillness, vast, unblinking, and immaculate in its indifference. From that stillness were born two paradoxes, twin custodians of all that would ever come to be lost. The first was the fairy, a flicker of rebellion against oblivion. She was woven from the bright residue of laughter, the nervous, trembling kind that escapes in the presence of sorrow. Her wings were veined with denial, her smile the soft protest of all that refuses to end. She learned early that beauty is not truth, but transaction, and that innocence, like ivory, has a price. The second was the Reaper, an architect of absence, tall as inevitability, thin as consequence. He moved with the grace of certainty. His voice was the music of endings, each syllable an unspoken benediction. To him, death was not cruelty, it was correction, the balancing of the equation written by life's impatience. They met where the living world frayed at its edges, in dreams that had forgotten their owners, in graveyards that outlived their mourners. The Reaper built monuments of memory, stacking skulls like punctuation marks in a sermon of grim truth. The fairy hovered near, eyes glimmering, fingers deft as sin. "Why do you steal from me, little wing?" he asked once, without looking up. Her laughter scattered like frost in the moonlight. "Because you collect what has died," she whispered, I collect what has been. And in that exchange hung a terrible understanding that they were not rivals, but reflections, two movements in the same eternal symphony, she, the first note of surrender, he, the final chord of release. So they laboured side by side in the shadow of existence, each pretending not to notice the other's hand upon the same design. The fairy would glide through the sleeping world, bartering loss for promise, teaching children that decay could be sweet if one believed hard enough. And the reaper, patient artisan of endings, would wait through the long ages of their joy, until those same children, old and smiling, found rest in his quiet keeping. Thus was the rhythm of the universe composed, a tooth, a breath, a heartbeat, a tolling bell. And though mortals still whisper that the tooth fairy brings reward and the reaper brings ruin, both smile in the dim corridors between dreams, for they know themselves to be the instruments of the same mercy, she, the illusion that softens the fall, he, the gravity that completes it. The fairy's laughter shivers across the hush of the grave, and the reaper's silence curls beneath the child's pillow, for all light longs for shadow, and every shadow, in the quiet of its hunger, remembers the light. Part 2. The Bargain of Breath. There was a night when the moon rose heavy with remembrance, and even the stars dimmed their gaze. In a glade untouched by time, the fairy found a stag lying upon the moss. His body was broken by pursuit, his eyes dulled by the soft surrender of pain. She felt his breath flutter, a candle's final shiver before the dark. At the edge of the trees, the reaper stood, silent and still, the air around him folding inward like the hush before prayer. He watched, patient as the turning of an age, his duty clear and unadorned. "Not yet," whispered the fairy, her voice trembling like the dawn before it learns to rise. "There's still a spark within him, the last ember of what was divine." She reached forth, her palm alight with forbidden grace, and breathed her power into the beast. Flesh remembered itself, bone straightened, the stag rose, trembling, alive once more. For a time, joy returned to her heart, yet the forest began to whisper. Seasons passed, but the stag did not heal. Its gait grew twisted, its eyes clouded with confusion. Hunger came and would not leave. Sleep came and brought no rest. The fairy watched as mercy curdled into torment. When the reaper came again, he did not speak. He simply stood among the falling leaves, his form outlined by quiet inevitability. The stag lifted its weary head and saw him, and in that instant, peace flickered in its dimming eyes. It bent its forelegs, lowered itself upon the moss, and bowed its head, forlorn of life. The reaper raised his scythe, solemn, deliberate, and with one clean stroke, the air split like a sigh. The soul of the stag, cleansed of corruption and decay, unfurled in the silver mist and vanished into calm. Then the reaper lowered his blade, not in conquest, but in reverence, bowing his hooded head in gratitude for the willing acceptance of a final breath. The fairy fell to her knees, her radiance flickering. From her eyes fell tears, bright as morning dew, heavy with remorse. One drop struck the edge of the scythe as it dipped towards the earth, and the steel shimmered as though a star had fallen onto it. In that moment, the blade absorbed her sorrow, its cold edge tempered by the echo of compassion. The reaper looked upon his weapon, and though his face was hidden, something eternal shifted in the silence between them. The fairy said nothing, for she understood that her gift had changed more than the stag's fate. It had changed the nature of endings themselves. And so it was that mortals no longer feared the moment of release. They came to believe that within the scythe's gleam lay the promise of passage, not punishment. The fairy watched from the edge of the world, her sorrow softened by knowing that even endings could now carry tenderness. From the place where her tears had fallen, a flower grew, pale as moonlight, bitter on the tongue, beautiful to behold. It would come to be known as Belladonna, the bloom of gentle departure. And the gods, it is said, smiled upon that glade, for in the mingling of defiance and duty, they saw the birth of a greater mercy, that death, touched by compassion, became not the thief of life, but the keeper of its peace. Part 3. The Lament of the Waning Light. And it was told, in the elder days, before sorrow took its throne, that humankind was drawn upon the world. They moved in gladness, their feet unshod upon the living earth. They danced in the glades of birch and pine, their flutes rising like skylarks towards the sun. No shadow knew their hearts, for all was still and kind beneath the gaze of the fairy, who watched from the veiled places where starlight dreams. She saw them laugh by the rivers and linger by the fires, and in their laughter her own song was returned to her. Thus she loved them as her children, for in them she saw the spark she had once wept into the scythe. But from the light of joy was born the shadow of longing. From longing came possession, and from possession envy took root, briar thorned with wrath. And the flutes were broken for the forging of swords, and the drums that had called to dancing now summoned the march to war. Blood fell upon the soil, and the soil kept the memory. Then the reaper walked once more upon the fields of man. He took no pride in the taking, nor joy in the harvest of his hand. For the droplet of the fairy's tear still shone upon his blade, and it tempered death with mercy. Each soul that passed beneath the curve of that light was gathered gently, as one gathers the petals of a fallen flower. When grief at last covered the world as ash upon a hearth, she came to the edge of all things, where the sea devours the stars and silence holds dominion. There the reaper stood, his scythe dim in the dusk. The fairy beheld what humankind had become, and her heart was as water, full and breaking. She wept upon the wind, and her tears became the rivers. She sighed into the leaves, and they whispered her name. Her anguish was of thunder and hail, and though the eyes of mortals no longer saw her, their heart still trembled with her remembrance. A kindness before parting, a breath of peace before the end. And she spake unto him, Is this the sum of what we made? Is mercy but a fading echo in the fields of wrath? And the reaper answered, It is not the end, bright one, but the return. All that lives must fall to rest, and all that rests shall bloom again. But thou too must return, for thy sorrow is the seed of the world's renewal. Then the fairy looked upon the broken earth and said, If I must die, let it grant life to the earth and all her children. She spread her wings, and her light became as a storm of gold. It fell upon the waters, the stones, the trembling roots, and her form was lost, but her essence went forth into every living thing. Her laughter became the murmur of waterfalls, her breath the shimmer on dragonfly wings, her grace the glint of dawn upon the eyes of humankind. And the reaper bowed his head, for in that moment he understood that death was not ending, but the breath between heartbeats. So it was written, the fairy sleeps within the earth. It is said that when the wind moves through the barley, or light shivers on a river's face, or kindness stirs without reason, it is she who passes. And when the reaper comes, he comes not in cruelty, but as a keeper of her gift, to lift each soul with gentle hands, as she once lifted the fallen stag. And thus was the circle bound, light to shadow, sorrow to grace. And the gods smiled, for their children had learnt that compassion is eternal, even beyond the veil. Epilogue, the breath between heartbeats. The story ended long after she'd fallen asleep. He slipped the coin into the small pouch, turned off the lamp, and stood for a moment by the window. Rain traced slow lines down the glass, soft as breath. Beyond the garden, mist drifted across the fields, and for an instant the moonlight bent through it, as if the ground were whispering to the night sky. He reached for the pouch and let the tooth rest in his palm. Under the pale light, it seemed impossibly small, almost weightless, a fragment of childhood, still bright with the innocence it had carried. He held it there for a moment, feeling its smoothness against his skin, then slipped it gently into the pocket of his shirt, somehow unable to leave it behind just yet. It would soon be gone, traded for the currency of belief, and in that tender exchange he saw all of parenthood, the giving, the letting go, the quiet ache of love that asks for nothing back. He wondered if everything precious must be lost for us to remember how much it mattered. He thought of the old tales, of gods, ghosts, and quiet miracles that once walked beside us. Perhaps they'd never truly gone. Perhaps they'd only learnt to wait, woven now into rivers, into wind, into warmth between two people who choose kindness. He turned back towards the bed. His child murmured softly, lost in a dream, one hand curled beneath her cheek. He leant down and placed his hand upon her. She stirred, let out a small sigh, and settled once more. He felt the steady rhythm of her breathing, the quiet pulse beneath his palm. He smiled then, soaking in the precious moment, grateful for the peace of it, for the simple mercy of being here, now. And somewhere in the hush between her heartbeat and his, the world felt whole again.